Hello and welcome to the Real News Network. I'm your host, Aman Azhar. And my guest today is Mr. Abdul-Matin. He's the author of the book Deen, which argues that Islam teaches caring for the planet and the species that we share this planet with. Thank you, Mr. Mateen, for taking out time and speaking with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
So let me fire away by asking, how central is the climate justice to the Islamic faith?
First, I want to preface this by saying that there are, in the work that I've done developing Deen and also just working in the environmental field, one of the things that we try to do is to try and find ways to connect with other faith groups and seeing that as part of the larger environmental movement. And one of the things we wanted to do is to find specific texts, scriptural evidence that points to the relationship that human beings have to the natural world, and specifically the human being having a negative or positive impact on the planet. And I'll just read briefly. It says, it's Ayah 30:41. It's corruption has appeared on the land and in the sea because of what the hands of humans have wrought. This is in order that we give them a taste of the consequences of their misdeeds. And so I'll just remind, as corruption has appeared on the land and the sea because of what the hands of humans have wrought. And specifically, scholars throughout history of all different communities and schools of thought have said that this corruption specifically points to pollution, and that human beings, and they've used this as evidence time and time again, that human beings have a negative impact on the planet. And from my understanding, there is no other scriptural evidence from any of the other holy books that specifically says that human beings have a negative impact on the planet, or can have a negative impact on the planet.
So it kind of ties into my next question, which is that the title of the first chapter of your book is "The Earth is a Mosque," and looking at it from today, it seems that this mosque reeks of confusion, greed, selfishness, and a pandemic. So, what went wrong?
Well, I think for a long period of time, we've been caught up in this one way of looking at it. I think this is another point of Scripture and a way people have understood Scripture, to say that human beings have a responsibility to be on the planet. We are the protectors or the vicegerents on the earth, meaning that we are the masters and controllers of the earth. And I think for many Christian and Muslim and Jewish scholars have seen that, particularly in medieval times up until the sort of the industrial age, as human beings can do whatever they want. We can take from the earth, we can do whatever we want on the planet because we are essentially the gods on earth. I think that there's a better way to look at that role, and that we have a trust and a responsibility to maintain the delicate balance and the bounty of the planet to ensure that it will continue to have bounty for future generations. So I think that what went wrong was that we used that idea that we could do whatever we want, and then we did whatever we wanted. And for hundreds of years, we've sort of extracted things out of the planet. We've destroyed natural habitats. We've poisoned the skies and poisoned the air. We've made our waters murky and undrinkable, and now we're paying the price.
So let me ask you, why did you feel the need to write this book? I mean, do American Muslims or Muslims in general don't know what their religion says about caring for the planet?
I would say that American Muslims are, there was some research done some time ago that American Muslims are very wealthy. American Muslims are, by and large, obviously that's not I live in New York City, and there's huge immigrant populations that aren't necessarily the typical Midwestern, suburban Muslim communities and large masajid and that sort of thing. But see American Muslims as just like you would see other Americans in the way that in their consumption patterns. So there's not as much reflective, they're not very reflective about how they use their power and use their wealth. And in that sense, there needed to be a sort of we needed to shake them up a little bit, remind them that their faith has an ecological element as well.
So have you managed to shake them up?
If you had asked me that question when the book came out, I would say we're a little bit. But of late, I've been extremely impressed with the younger generation. I would say Gen Z and Gen Y, young folks that are really stepping up and really taking. I'm actually looking at a list. There's about 15 different Instagram accounts where young Muslims have sort of taken their Islam in the environment, and they're taking it in all different ways, where they're really saying, it's not just about let's protect the planet and preserve the natural areas, but also let's create sustainable products. And there's a huge growing movement of young Muslims that are really taking that to heart.
And do you think that kind of an activism, when we see it Instagram or Facebook for that matter, is really tying into the national political discourse in any way at all? Because the only instances that we hear the references of religion in the national debate is in a negative connotation, really. So is it more symbolic activism, or is it really paying some dividends, looking at the situation of the climate as well?
That's a great point. I think if you had asked me that question maybe 5 years ago, I would have said, well, I'm not sure if these efforts are really useful. But the reality is that more young people and people who are greater numbers are getting their news from different sources. They don't trust CNN and Fox News and MSNBC. They may have value and merit, but they're not really going to them for their primary news source. And also, what do you go to the news for? You go to the news to get inspired. You go to the news to get an idea of what opportunities are available to you to connect. And I truly think that young people are finding that they can find that sense of source of inspiration and the information that they need from other sources, from people like their peers or people that are doing work in fields that they want to get involved in outside. And you're not going to find those things. They're not represented in mainstream media. So they're really just saying, you know what, I'm going to create this, or I'm going to find it. You know, a good friend of mine was saying, I found leaders and voices online that are speaking to me in ways that would never be found on the corporate media. And so I think that they're bypassing corporate media. And I think corporate media is sort of on notice that their days might be numbered.
Do you think the religious discourses or the faith really have a lot of pull on people in this day and age, with so much of a competing demands from so many other mainstream discourses?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Do people even care anymore? Are they looking for that kind of? Yeah, I think that they are. I think this is an existential crisis that the world is in right now. The only other time that we've been able to explain a global phenomenon like this pandemic is thinking about is like the flood. You know, this is at the scale of that, because every human being community will have a story of what they were doing in this particular moment. So I do think that people are looking for deeper meaning, right? Barack Obama was elected president, but then the fundamental shift, there was not a fundamental power shift. It was a sort of a nip and tuck reform, and it didn't shake the foundations or transform the way that our society is structured so that the powerless are becoming more powerful. So I think people are seeing that representation just for the sake of itself isn't the answer. Having people look like you in power isn't necessarily the answer if they're not going to do anything fundamentally different. And so people are looking now, they're saying, wow, those things don't matter anymore. There's a lot of lies that are being sort of uncovered. And in that, they're saying, well, where is the deeper meaning? And a lot of folks are saying the deeper meaning perhaps is in some of the traditional sources, and let's understand those traditional sources before we throw them out.
So is there really a worthwhile effort on the part of the interfaith communities in the United States to put their weight behind the movement for climate justice and tackle climate issues?
I think practical expressions of interfaith work are more important now than just your old-fashioned, a bunch of, it almost sounds like a joke about a bar. You know, you get a imam and a priest and a rabbi, they walk into a bar together. Now you have the imam and the priest and the rabbi, they get at a press conference and they say, we're brothers, but then nothing happens after that. I think what's happening now is that people are saying, well, let's not just talk about it, and maybe we don't even need to talk about the nuances of our faith or the differences in our belief. Let's just actually get to work.
But the question though remains, why are these voices muted in the national mainstream debates, and especially the national politics? We've heard lots of candidates, Democratic candidates included, and we did not really listen to any of the references to the faith or the calling of the faith in terms of tackling the challenges of today. And there's no bigger challenge than the pandemic, and it's what might have caused it, including the climate issues.
I teach at Baruch College, and I usually have them all the students stand and they give me all their wallets and their cell phones and their money, and I have them put it all on the table. And then I have everybody in the class stand up and stand in the corner, and then two people in the class stand near the wallet and the cell phones and the money. And then I ask them, what is keeping the people who are the large group of people from getting their money and their stuff back? And that's just a sort of a class representation of the 1%. The 1% really has nothing affecting them except for just the idea that they are in charge, and the idea that they are in sort of in command of things. Institutions reinforce their power and their control. So institutions like schools and even in religious institutions reinforce this idea of this power structure, this power dynamic. What I think we need to do is, when we talk about reform, reform would say, we're still going to keep power, but maybe you can have some seats. Or we're still going to keep power, but here, I'll give you your wallet back. In this context, I'm saying we need transformation. Transformation is different. And that's where we need to move the needle. And I think what's the problem with the mainstream media is that they don't want any voices about transformation. They only want voices that will maintain the existing power dynamic. If you are about poking at the structure and the system and saying this needs to fundamentally change from the bottom to the top, they are not interested in hearing from you.
And do you think in going forward, there's going to be any hope in terms of this basic matrix being changed from from top down, or from the grassroots to the way up? Do you really see that happening anytime soon, given the gravity of the situation that we feel today?
The framework that I operate within is basically saying we are in a transition from an extractive economy based on extracting things out of the ground and extracting people from place to place through slavery and colonialism. All these projects, we're from the extractive economy to a regenerative one where we heal Earth. So, for example, we were talking to folks in Jordan and in parts of Yemen where they're literally going into deserts and making deserts bloom again. We have the technology, we have the energy, we have the will. We just haven't focused on that. So I think that we are, and the problem is that to get us off of this extractive economy, we're addicted to oil and addicted to sugar and addicted to drugs that fundamentally, which are a part of this economy. To get us away from that, we need to move into this regenerative way. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better. So I don't know if in my time, we are going to definitely see a dramatic transformation that I would like to see. But I do know that we have to set up the people that are coming after us so that they can make that happen.
I'll move to my last two questions. And I think what I'm asking now is, do we need religions to care for the planet?
I think that we have, that's a good question. That's like one of those existential questions that shakes you a bit. From my understanding of the way that as a Muslim, I literally physically come from the earth. What I am part of physically comes from the planet Earth. When I die, my body will go into the ground and my body will recede away and it will go back into the planet Earth. We are inextricably linked to this planet. This is our planet. So I do think that we have a fundamental responsibility, because we have conducted all of our affairs and all of our life to ensure that it is maintained and taken care of. Now, religion holds people account and sort of keeps people, reminds people of that. And I think that that's the role of religion in some ways, is to remind people that they have this fundamental relationship in nature, with nature, and that they cannot extract themselves from that relationship. And that we have to treat the planet the way we want to treat ourselves. And that means that it will enable us to actually have, a good life. So if you want to live a good, happy, healthy life, you have to treat the natural world around you in a way that you would want to treat yourself. And I think religion facilitates that conversation. Religion reminds us of the importance of that. Now, you don't have to have that, obviously. I think it's great that there's a lot of humanist expressions that really resonate in the same way. And I think usually when it comes to people that are really caring for the planet, you don't actually care what perspective they're coming from. You really come at it. But the fundamental thing is that we're in this together. And I think that that's one of the beauties of all the different paths and faiths and walks of life, is that if you understand your fundamental humanity and your responsibility to each other, then you're not going to get caught up in those details. But that faith allows you to be more focused and to be more mindful.
I'm all for this expression of hope, but also looking at the situation where we're in today. Do you think for a moment that organized religion have failed us in terms of motivating their followers to care for the planet?
That I agree. I think so 100%. I think so 100%. I think, you haven't, for centuries, basically, religion has basically facilitated large-scale mining industries, each tradition, in terms of the large religions on the planet, Islam and Judaism and Christianity, were part and were leaders of the slave trade. You can't say that none of them were not. They were all part of it. So they were all part of the whole project of that put us in the situation that we're in today. And then they doubled down on it when they found oil in places like Saudi Arabia and other places, when they said, oh, we can make more money out of this. I think greed was a fundamental factor. And I think religions have typically wrapped themselves in rulers and facilitated the installation of rulers that oppress people. Without a doubt, organized religions have a big problem, and have always had that problem. And that's where this constant tension between the flock and the faithful and what they're supposed to do, and holding their religious leaders and political leaders accountable. I've always felt that if you are a good, I actually was once on a panel, or not, I wasn't on the panel. I was actually just a volunteer in an event where the Dalai Lama was there, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and Imam Zaid, who are two American Muslim leaders and scholars of merit, and they're relevant in a global scale. Imam Zaid was the one who gave the funeral service for Muhammad Ali, just to give context. And there was a bunch of other religious leaders there from all different faiths, every single faith you can imagine. And they were on a stage. And what was the thing that was connecting them all? They were all laughing, they were all smiling, but they all essentially said the same thing. If you are dedicated to your faith and dedicated to your tradition, you don't have time to tell someone else how to live. And I think that that's a lesson for us, is that you can come from all different angles, but if you are focused on following your path and following your tradition, you're not going to try and impede someone else's path or their tradition. And I think that that's an important lesson, I think, for religious groups, is that they're constantly trying to impose their will on other people. And in Islam, we know that faith is not you can't force faith on anybody. You can't impose your religion. You can't make someone become a Muslim. You can't force someone to become a Christian. And I think that the heavy-handedness of religious scholars sometimes, and heavy-handedness of religious institutions, has definitely turned people away.
Well, that also brings us to the end of this conversation. Thank you once again, Mr. Ibrahim Abdul-Matin, for speaking to us today, and for your efforts to highlight the climate urgency through your advocacy and through your writing. Thanks also to our audiences for tuning in. You can look us up at therealnews.com. And for myself and the crew at The Real News, for now, it's goodbye and be well.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.